It was an ordinary Friday evening, the kind where the weeks blur together in the same rhythm. I was seated at the kitchen table, reviewing work emails on my laptop while Emma cooked dinner. Ada was twirling around the living room in her ballet costume, practicing a routine she had been excited about all week. Arthur, in his karate gi, sat cross-legged on the floor, engrossed in an animated movie. The house buzzed with normalcy, yet there was an odd, subtle tension in the air, like the faint scent of a storm brewing. Emma had been quieter than usual lately. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Tax season was around the corner, and as an accountant, her work schedule had grown hectic. But this silence was different. It wasn't the tired quiet of a busy mind, it was a carefully curated stillness, like someone trying too hard to keep the peace. "John, could you pass the salad bowl?" Emma asked, her voice carrying a forced cheeriness. I complied, our hands brushing as she took the bowl. Her touch was colder than I expected. I dismissed it, focusing instead on the aroma of grilled chicken wafting through the room. The evening passed uneventfully, or so I thought. Later that night, as Emma showered, I went to grab my phone from the charging station in our bedroom. A soft ping echoed from her side of the bed. I glanced at her phone, which lay unlocked on the nightstand, a message from someone named Alex lighting up the screen. The text was innocuous at first glance, "Can't stop thinking about last night. You're amazing." My stomach tightened. It wasn't just the content, it was the heart emoji at the end. I stared at the screen, my thoughts racing. Who was Alex? Why was someone messaging Emma like this? And more importantly, why had she never mentioned him before? The sound of the shower stopped, snapping me out of my daze. I quickly set her phone back down and left the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to make of it yet, but I knew one thing for sure, something was very, very wrong. Just as I was trying to process what I'd seen on Emma's phone, my work phone buzzed insistently on the kitchen counter. It was Mike, my boss. "John, sorry to bother you at this hour," he began, his voice tense. "The auditors are coming in first thing tomorrow, and I just realized the documents we need aren't finalized. Can you swing by the office tonight?" It was the last thing I wanted to hear. My mind was already a tangled mess of doubts and suspicions, and now I had to pull myself together for work. But I knew better than to say no, our small-town office didn't leave much room for errors. "Yeah, Mike. I'll be there in 20, I said, trying to sound composed. Emma was brushing out her wet hair in the bathroom when I knocked on the door to let her know I was heading out. She opened the door, a towel wrapped around her shoulders, her expression caught somewhere between surprise and relief. "That's sudden," she said, her tone neutral. "Mike needs some reports finished for the audit tomorrow," I explained. "It'll be a late one." She nodded, her gaze flickering briefly to the side. "Okay. Drive safe." As I backed out of the driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that her response had been oddly nonchalant, too neutral, almost as if she was relieved I'd be gone. The office was deserted when I arrived, the quiet hum of fluorescent lights doing little to ease the tension in my chest. I booted up my computer, determined to lose myself in work to block out my swirling thoughts. But after an hour of organizing spreadsheets and printing reports, my focus wavered. That text from Alex kept replaying in my mind, each word more damning than the last. Against my better judgment, I opened my personal laptop, which I'd brought for backup, and logged into our shared family phone account. It wasn't something I'd done before, but I knew I could access the call and text history for all our lines. The search bar stared back at me, daring me to type his name. I hesitated, but the nagging doubt wouldn't let me stop. I typed, "Alex." The results popped up almost instantly. Dozens of messages exchanged over the past few weeks, late at night, during lunch breaks, even while we were sitting together watching TV. A few were sent while she was working late or running errands. My heart raced as I scrolled through the timestamps. It wasn't just the volume, it was the pattern. Consistent, secretive. There was no denying that this wasn't work-related. A noise from the hallway startled me, and I slammed the laptop shut, my pulse thundering in my ears. It was just the janitor making his rounds, but the moment shook me. I had uncovered enough to know something was very wrong. Yet, a voice in my head whispered, "Do you really know everything?" Tomorrow, I decided, I would find out. By the time dawn broke, my eyes felt like sandpaper from the long night at the office. The inspection had gone smoothly, and Mike, visibly relieved, clapped me on the shoulder. "Great work, John. Go home, get some sleep. You earned it," he said with a grin. I nodded, forcing a tired smile, but sleep was the last thing on my mind. My thoughts were still circling around Emma and those messages from Alex. I couldn't let it rest. Something deep inside me had shifted, and I knew I needed answers, today. When I pulled into our driveway, the house was unusually quiet. Emma had already dropped Ada and Arthur at their morning activities, and I was grateful for the momentary solitude. It gave me the chance to act without interruption. I started with her phone. Emma always left it charging in the kitchen when she wasn't home, and today was no exception. With trembling hands, I picked it up and scrolled to her messages. But the thread with Alex was gone. She deleted it. I felt a cold pit form in my stomach. Deleting messages was something Emma never did, at least not before now. It confirmed what I already suspected, she was hiding something. Next, I turned to her laptop. Emma rarely used it for work since most of her accounting was done at the office, but she occasionally brought it home. I knew the password, it was the same one she'd used for years. My fingers flew across the keyboard, logging in without hesitation. At first glance, it was a standard desktop, spreadsheets, email shortcuts, and family photos. But when I opened the browser, I saw a second email account bookmarked. My heart raced as I clicked it. The inbox opened without needing a password, and there they were, dozens of messages from Alex. Some were mundane, others flirtatious, but the most recent ones were the ones that crushed me. "Can't wait to see you again tonight. I'll bring the wine this time." Tonight? While I was supposed to be home catching up on sleep. The betrayal burned like acid in my chest. I needed to know more, where, when, why. I didn't have to look far. In her calendar, there was an entry marked "Yoga Night," a familiar alibi. But this time, I noticed a note attached, "Dinner with Alex, 6 p.m., Old Birch Inn." The Old Birch Inn was a quaint little restaurant just outside town. Not exactly a place for yoga, and certainly not the kind of spot where coworkers met casually. I slammed the laptop shut, my pulse hammering in my ears. I was done playing detective. Tonight, I would confront her. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I went through the motions, trying to act normal as the kids came home from their activities. Emma arrived shortly after, her smile as warm and familiar as ever. It made my stomach churn. How could she wear that smile while lying to my face? I watched her closely throughout dinner, studying every detail, how she avoided direct eye contact, how she barely touched her food, how she kept glancing at the clock. She wasn't even trying to hide her impatience to leave. Around 5:30, Emma excused herself, saying she needed to get ready for yoga. "I won't be too late," she said, pressing a quick kiss to my cheek. "Take your time," I replied, forcing a smile. "You deserve a night to unwind." As she headed upstairs, I busied myself tidying the kitchen, every muscle in my body tensed like a coiled spring. Once she left, I gave her a 10-minute head start, then grabbed my keys and followed. The drive to the Old Birch Inn felt like it stretched for hours, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. When I arrived, I parked discreetly across the street and waited, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Her car was already there, parked near the entrance. It didn't take long to spot her. Through the large windows of the restaurant, I saw Emma sitting at a cozy corner table, her head tilted toward the man across from her. They were laughing, the kind of easy, intimate laughter that used to belong to us. But it wasn't just the laughter that gutted me. It was the man. I froze, staring in disbelief. It was him. The man I'd spoken to that morning during the inspection at work, the auditor who had come to review our office. Alex. His name had slipped my mind earlier in the chaos, but now it all clicked. His sharp suit, his confident demeanor, the way he had casually introduced himself as though we were old friends. And now here he was, leaning across the table, holding Emma's hand like he belonged in my place. My pulse roared in my ears as I pieced it together. While I had been scrambling to keep my job intact, my wife had been planning this rendezvous with a man who had walked out of my office hours earlier without a care in the world. I wanted to storm in and confront them on the spot, but something held me back, pride, fear, or maybe the need for a plan. I needed more than a dramatic outburst. I needed to catch them in the act, undeniable proof that would leave no room for explanations or lies. I reached for my phone, opening the camera. With trembling hands, I snapped a few photos of the two of them through the window. Their laughter, the way he brushed her cheek, the clink of their glasses, they all felt like knives twisting in my chest. I wasn't just some nameless, faceless husband being betrayed. I had seen this man's face that morning, shaken his hand, exchanged pleasantries. And now, I had the proof I needed. As I watched them leave the restaurant, my heart pounded with a mix of anger and dread. They walked casually to Alex's car, Emma's arm looping through his like it was the most natural thing in the world. She laughed at something he said, her head tilting back in a way that made my blood boil. I followed them at a safe distance, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. They didn't go far, just across town to the city's most expensive hotel, the Grand Maple Lodge. My jaw clenched. Of course, it had to be there, the kind of place where the chandeliers glittered and the valet attendants wore white gloves. I parked discreetly across the street, close enough to see the lobby but far enough to stay out of sight. They handed their bags, her overnight bag, the same one she packed at home, to the bellhop. Then, as though they were a couple on a romantic getaway, they disappeared inside, arm in arm. I waited, my heart hammering in my chest. Minutes later, I saw them again through the grand windows of the lobby as they checked in at the front desk. My stomach churned, imagining the lies Emma must have told to make this possible. I needed to know where they were going. As they headed down a hallway, I left my car and slipped inside, careful to avoid the staff's attention. The elevator doors didn't open for them, instead, they walked past it toward the ground floor rooms. That was unexpected. I had assumed they'd go for a private suite high above the city. Instead, they were staying on the first floor, just off the main hallway. Maybe it was convenience or haste, whatever the reason, it worked in my favor. I waited until they disappeared down the hall, counting the doors they passed until they entered a room. Once the door clicked shut behind them, I made my way back outside. The night had fallen completely now, the hotel glowing warmly against the dark sky. My pulse quickened as I walked the perimeter, searching for the room's corresponding window. It wasn't hard to find. A single light glowed in one of the first-floor windows, just past the decorative garden beds. The curtains were drawn, but faint shadows flickered across them. My chest tightened as I imagined what was happening inside. For a moment, I debated my next move. Should I knock on the window, barge in, demand answers? Or should I just stand there, invisible, and let them expose themselves for what they truly were? I couldn't walk away now. I had come this far, and I needed to see this through to the bitter end. Standing outside that glowing window wasn't enough. I needed answers, no, I needed the truth. Every second I hesitated, the gnawing sense of betrayal inside me grew. The light spilling from the window was like a beacon, drawing me closer to the breaking point. I couldn't leave without knowing exactly what was happening in that room. I made my way back to the hotel lobby, my heart hammering in my chest. The manager, a middle-aged man with a well-kept suit and kind eyes, stood behind the front desk. He looked up as I approached, his professional smile faltering as he noticed the tension in my face. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked. I pulled out my phone and opened the photo I'd taken earlier through the restaurant window. "I believe my wife just checked in with that man," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to stay calm. "They went to one of the rooms on the first floor." The manager's expression turned cautious. "Sir, I'm not sure I can." "Please," I interrupted, lowering my voice. "I'm not here to cause a scene. I just need to know what's going on. I've been married to this woman for 11 years. We have kids. I need to know if she's throwing all that away." His lips pressed into a thin line, and I could tell he was torn between protocol and sympathy. Desperation clawed at me as I reached into my pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill, sliding it across the counter. "For your trouble," I added, my voice barely above a whisper. The manager hesitated, staring at the money for a long moment before shaking his head. "Keep your money," he said quietly. Then, glancing over his shoulder to ensure no one was watching, he reached into a drawer and pulled out a universal key card. He handed it to me, his expression softening. "Hang in there," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "But promise me you'll keep it quiet. No one here wants trouble." I nodded, unable to speak, and slipped the key card into my pocket. My hands were shaking as I walked back down the hallway, counting the doors again until I reached their room. The glowing light from the window confirmed it. I stood outside the door for what felt like an eternity, my hand hovering over the handle. What if I was wrong? What if I was about to destroy my family over a misunderstanding? But then I remembered the messages, the lies, the way she laughed with Alex at the restaurant. There was no misunderstanding. There was only truth, and it was waiting for me on the other side of that door. I slid the key card into the lock, hearing the faint beep as the mechanism clicked open. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The sight that greeted me would haunt me forever. As the door swung open, I braced myself for the worst. My mind was prepared for betrayal, for the intimacy I'd seen between Emma and Alex to unfold into something I could never unsee. But what greeted me on the other side was beyond anything I could have imagined. The room was dimly lit, with a soft glow from a bedside lamp casting long shadows on the walls. Emma stood in the center of the room, her back to me, dressed in a black leather outfit that clung tightly to her frame. It wasn't the kind of thing I'd ever seen her wear, or even imagined her owning. In her hand, she held a long whip, the leather loop coiled neatly. On the bed was Alex, handcuffed to the headboard, his mouth gagged with a red silk cloth. His eyes widened in shock when he saw me, and he made a muffled noise that might have been a plea or a warning. For a moment, I stood frozen in the doorway, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just infidelity, it was something far more bizarre. My heart pounded in my chest as I wondered if I was dreaming, or if the sleepless night and rising emotions had finally driven me to hallucinations. Then Emma turned to look at me, her eyes narrowing in anger. "Get out of here, John," she snapped, her voice sharp and commanding. Her words jolted me back to reality. "What? What is this?" I stammered, my voice trembling with a mix of confusion and disbelief. "John, I said get out," she repeated, her face now a mask of frustration. "You shouldn't be here." "Shouldn't be here?" I echoed, my voice rising. "What the hell is going on? Is this why you've been lying to me?" Alex made another muffled sound, his eyes darting between me and Emma. He looked anything but relaxed, as though he was caught in a situation that had spiraled out of his control. Emma, on the other hand, seemed more concerned with my presence than with the absurdity of the scene. "This is none of your business," she said, taking a step closer to me. Her tone was cold, almost dismissive, as though I was intruding on a private moment. "None of my business?" I shouted, the words bursting out of me. You're my wife. You've been sneaking around, lying about everything, and now this? I gestured wildly to the bed, where Alex was writhing against his restraints, his muffled noises growing louder. Emma's face softened slightly, but only for a moment. John, she said, her voice quieter now, this isn't what you think. Then explain it, I demanded. Because right now, I don't even know who you are. She hesitated, the whip still dangling from her hand. For the first time, I saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. But instead of answering, she stepped aside, her shoulders stiff with defiance. I'll explain everything, she said finally. But not here. Not now. Please, just go. I stared at her, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, and felt the ground shift beneath me. My mind screamed at me to demand answers, to force her to explain, but my body was frozen. The sheer absurdity of the scene had robbed me of my ability to think clearly. Without another word, I turned and walked out, the door clicking shut behind me. The cold night air hit me like a slap as I stepped outside, gasping for breath. What had I just witnessed? And what did it mean for the life we'd built together? The absurdity of the scene and the raw betrayal I felt overtook any shred of self-control I had left. My hands trembled as I raised my phone, snapping a photo of Emma in her strange outfit and Alex bound on the bed. It was damning evidence, something no one could deny. But I didn't stop there. I shoved the door open and stormed into the room, my fury giving me a kind of reckless strength. Emma's eyes widened as I reached out and grabbed the whip from her hands. John, stop, she cried, but her voice barely registered. With a burst of anger, I swung the whip down hard on Alex's exposed leg. The crack of leather against skin was sharp, followed by a high-pitched squeal from him, something between a scream and a pathetic whine. He writhed against the restraints, his face contorting in pain and fear. Emma lunged to stop me, grabbing at my arm, but I shoved her away with more force than I intended. She stumbled, catching herself on the dresser, her eyes now filled with a mix of anger and shock. What the hell are you doing? She yelled. I should be asking you that. I roared, glaring at her. What is this? You've been sneaking around, humiliating me, and now this? How long has this been going on? Before she could answer, Alex's muffled grunts caught my attention. I yanked the gag from his mouth, and he gasped for air before shouting, "You bastard! Get out of here. Come back later, and you'll see me and your wife having even more fun." Something in me snapped. His smugness, his sheer audacity, was too much. I raised the whip again and brought it down hard across his thigh, leaving a vivid red mark that mirrored the heat rising in my chest. He howled in pain, his bravado momentarily shattered. Do you think I care about your stupid theatrics? I spat, my voice shaking with rage. You're a pathetic excuse for a man. And you, I turned to Emma, my voice cracking. How could you? Alex, still writhing on the bed, suddenly laughed, a dry, bitter sound that made my blood boil even more. You think you're the victim here, he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. Do you even know what's at stake? That report you worked on all night? I've already seen it. Every detail. And let me tell you, if it weren't for your dumb wife playing with me so often, you'd be out of a job. His words hit like a sledgehammer, knocking the wind out of me. I froze, whip still in hand, as his taunts echoed in my head. What are you talking about? I demanded. Your career, Alex hissed, a twisted grin spreading across his face despite the red welt on his leg. Do you think I came here just for fun? I control that audit. And if I decide you failed it, you're done. Out of work. Your little suburban dream. Gone. Emma tried to interject, her voice pleading. John, don't listen to him. He's just trying to. Shut up. I snapped, my voice loud enough to make her flinch. I turned back to Alex, my hands trembling with rage. You think you can blackmail me? Ruin my life and laugh about it? You've already ruined your own life, Alex sneered. You just don't know it yet. The room felt like it was spinning, the weight of his words crashing down on me. Everything, my career, my marriage, my family, felt like it was slipping through my fingers, all because of this man and the woman I thought I could trust. The room felt suffocating, every breath I took weighed down by Alex's smug laughter and Emma's pleading gaze. My mind raced. If what Alex said was true, that he could tank my audit, my career, it wasn't just my pride at stake anymore. It was everything I had worked for, everything my kids relied on. But his words about Emma hurt even more. Your wife playing with me so often. I couldn't contain the rage boiling inside me. I raised the whip again, but Emma stepped between us, her arms outstretched. Stop it, John. Enough, she shouted, tears streaming down her face. Her words barely registered. Enough? Enough? I shouted back, my voice trembling with fury. This is what you've been doing. Lying to me, to our kids. For him. You've destroyed everything. Alex, still bound but now smirking despite the welt on his leg, leaned forward as much as the restraints allowed. You're pathetic, he sneered. You think this is about love? It's about power. And I have it. Over her, over you, over your entire miserable life. The whip fell from my hand, my fists clenching as I turned to Emma. Tell me he's lying, I demanded, my voice breaking. Tell me this hasn't been going on for months. Tell me this isn't what you've chosen over our family. Emma hesitated, her lips trembling. John, she began, but the words didn't come. Her silence was the answer I dreaded. My chest tightened, a crushing weight settling over me. Unbelievable, I muttered, stepping back. My gaze flicked between the two of them, Alex still taunting me, Emma looking utterly broken. You're both disgusting. I turned to leave, but Alex's voice stopped me in my tracks. You're walking away. That's right, go. Run home to your kids and tell them how daddy couldn't keep mommy happy. I snapped. Before I knew what I was doing, I lunged at him, grabbing his collar and yanking him forward until we were face to face. Say one more word, I growled, my voice low and dangerous, and I swear I'll make you regret it. Do it, Alex hissed, his eyes gleaming with defiance. Hit me. Give me another reason to ruin your life. My grip tightened, and for a fleeting moment, I considered it. But then I caught a glimpse of Emma's face, pale, horrified, tears streaming down her cheeks, and I let him go. He fell back against the bed, his smirk faltering as I stepped away. You're not worth it, I said, my voice hollow. I turned to Emma one last time. When you get home, we're having a conversation, I said coldly. But don't expect me to listen to your excuses. Without waiting for a response, I left the room, slamming the door behind me. The night air hit me like a wave, but it did little to calm the storm inside. My mind reeled as I made my way to my car. I couldn't go home, not yet. I needed time to think, to process what had just happened. I drove aimlessly, the city lights blurring past, until I found myself at the edge of a quiet park. Parking under a street lamp, I rested my head against the steering wheel, the weight of the night finally crashing down on me. What had I just witnessed? Who was this woman I'd shared my life with? And how was I supposed to rebuild from here, when everything I thought I knew had crumbled in an instant? I didn't have the answers yet. But one thing was certain, when Emma came home, everything would change. I called my boss, explained the situation, and he told me that Alex really had influence in our city. He warned that if I crossed paths with Alex in a negative way, I could forget about finding work here. However, my boss assured me he would support any decision I made and, if needed, recommend me in other cities where he knew office owners. After some thought, I realized moving wasn't an option. I had a house with a mortgage to pay off for another 4 years, a car loan under similar terms, and children who had strong friendships and beloved clubs in the city. I felt trapped and realized I would have to endure everything happening around me. To avoid breaking up my family, I forgave my wife, but we were no longer truly married. When the dust settled, I began planning my revenge. I am a fit, attractive man in my prime, and yet my wife cheated on me with an auditor. I decided to give them a taste of their own medicine. Using Facebook, I found Alex's profile and discovered he was married to a bingo enthusiast. I visited her favorite bingo spot a few times and, eventually, we crossed paths. She was a beautifully dressed brunette with a great bust. Noticing the vinyl record in her hands, I knew it was time to act. I approached her, striking up a conversation about the record. She opened up quickly, revealing her name was Pearl. After 2 hours of chatting, she mentioned Alex. That was my inroad. She confided that Alex often stayed late at work, and recently, she had noticed women's perfume on him and unexplained bruises. She was suspicious, and I thought to myself, this is my chance. Eventually, I revealed the truth about Alex and my wife. To my surprise, Pearl wasn't shocked. This wasn't Alex's first betrayal. She was eager to punish him but lacked solid evidence, as all she had were inconclusive text messages. Our communication deepened, and one evening, we found ourselves heading to a hotel together. That night was unforgettable. For the first time in a long while, I felt a weight lift from my heart. The fact that Alex's stunning, busty wife was now lying beside me only sweetened the moment. The first part of my revenge was complete. Now for the second. I shared all the incriminating information I had on Alex with Pearl. She contacted a lawyer and began dismantling Alex's life piece by piece. I actively helped her with this. Our meetings became more frequent and, over time, our relationship evolved into something beyond just a partnership to ruin Alex. Destroying Alex's life became a mission, but somewhere along the way, it turned into something much more. Pearl and I worked together seamlessly. What started as a cold, calculated partnership to dismantle a man's reputation blossomed into something warm and unexpected. Late-night strategy sessions turned into deep conversations about life, dreams, and regrets. Pearl was more than just Alex's betrayed wife. She was funny, sharp, and surprisingly kind, even while plotting revenge. I found myself drawn to her, not just for her striking looks but for her resilience and wit. One evening, as we sifted through evidence on Alex, Pearl stopped mid-sentence, her fingers brushing against mine as we reached for the same document. "You know," she said with a small smile, "I never thought I'd find someone like you in the middle of all this chaos." The air felt heavier, charged with something unspoken. I smiled back, leaning just a little closer. "Funny, I was thinking the same about you." What started as a gentle touch turned into a kiss that unraveled the tension between us. That night, revenge took a backseat to something neither of us expected. In the days that followed, Alex's life continued to unravel. His shady financial dealings caught up with him, thanks to some well-placed tips to his former clients. His social circle evaporated as rumors of his infidelity and fraud spread like wildfire. Pearl, armed with an ironclad case, secured a divorce that left him with little more than his name, and even that had lost its value. But the sweetest victories weren't in the courtroom or the boardroom. They were in the quiet moments Pearl and I shared, dancing in her living room to her favorite vinyl records, laughing over the absurdity of our unlikely alliance, and stealing kisses in the places Alex used to frequent. One evening, as we celebrated the final nail in Alex's coffin, his expulsion from his professional association, we decided to toast our success. We booked a romantic dinner at a rooftop restaurant, the kind of place that oozed elegance and charm. The view was stunning, the wine was perfect, and Pearl looked breathtaking. As we toasted to new beginnings, she leaned in, her voice low and teasing. "You know, I think we make a pretty good team. Maybe we should go into business together." I laughed, raising my glass. What kind of business? Revenge consulting? Before she could respond, a waiter approached, balancing an elaborate tray of desserts. But just as he reached our table, he tripped, sending a cascade of molten chocolate and whipped cream flying, straight onto Pearl's dress. For a moment, there was stunned silence. Then Pearl burst out laughing, her eyes sparkling. "Well," she said, dabbing at the mess with a napkin, "if that's not karma reminding us to quit while we're ahead, I don't know what is." And just like that, in the middle of a chaotic, chocolate-stained moment, I realized that revenge was no longer the goal. I had already won, and she was sitting right in front of me.